This is a general astrological interpretation for Donald Trump for the next 30 days. It is based on collective planetary symbolism and energetic cycles. Astrology does not predict concrete events, nor does it determine outcomes. It reflects themes, pressures, and tendencies that may become more visible during a given period. The coming month opens with an unmistakable sense of intensity. The planetary atmosphere surrounding Donald Trump suggests a phase where momentum is building beneath the surface, even when external circumstances appear paused or uncertain. This is not a quiet energy. It is a charged, anticipatory current, one that demands awareness, discipline, and strategic self-control. There is a strong emphasis on visibility. Over the next 30 days, the chart symbolism points toward heightened public attention, scrutiny, and interpretation by others. This is a period where words echo longer, gestures are magnified, and intentions are projected onto actions, whether they are intended or not. The energy does not suggest invisibility or retreat. On the contrary, it suggests that presence itself becomes a focal point. Mentally, this month highlights a dynamic tension between confidence and pressure. There is clarity of self-image, yet at the same time, a growing awareness that external forces are not fully controllable. This can produce moments of irritation, impatience, or defensiveness. Astrology advises that these reactions are signals, not threats. They indicate areas where strategy must replace instinct. Communication plays a decisive role throughout this cycle. Planetary influences suggest that statements, interviews, negotiations, or symbolic gestures carry disproportionate weight. Even silence becomes a message. The astrological tone encourages deliberate pacing in speech and timing. What is said impulsively may create resistance, while what is said with calculation can reinforce authority. Power dynamics are especially active during this month. There is a recurring theme of confrontation, not necessarily direct, but ideological or symbolic. Challenges may arise from institutions, opposing forces, or collective narratives rather than from individuals alone. This is a test of how influence is maintained when external validation is uncertain. Emotionally, there is a resurfacing of old patterns. Past conflicts, unresolved rivalries, or long-standing grievances may re-enter awareness. Astrology frames this not as regression, but as a call for integration. The next 30 days ask for discernment between what still serves a long-term agenda and what drains energy without strategic return. There is also a notable emphasis on endurance. The chart suggests that this is not a sprint, but a positioning phase. Efforts made now may not yield immediate rewards, yet they lay groundwork that becomes visible later. Patience here is not passivity, it is controlled strength. Financial and material symbolism during this period points toward conservation rather than expansion. The planetary tone favors safeguarding resources, reassessing commitments, and avoiding unnecessary exposure. Bold moves may be tempting, but astrology suggests that restraint increases leverage in the long run. Midway through the month, the energetic focus subtly shifts. Pressure begins to transform into clarity. Situations that initially feel constrictive start revealing their strategic purpose. This is a moment where adaptability becomes more valuable than rigidity. The ability to pivot without appearing to retreat is emphasized. Themes connected to global positioning and international symbolism also surface during this cycle. Greenland, in astrological terms, appears as a symbol rather than a literal forecast. It represents territory, long-term resources, strategic geography, and influence that unfolds over decades rather than months. The planetary symbolism suggests a renewed focus on legacy thinking, not immediate acquisition, but future relevance. The energy here is about endurance, resilience, and cold calculation rather than emotional reaction. Greenland's symbolism also speaks to patience and the long game. Ice does not move quickly, but when it does, it reshapes landscapes. Astrology associates this imagery with slow, deliberate power, suggesting that influence built quietly can outlast louder displays. Davos, symbolically, appears as a focal point for elite discourse, global perception, and power negotiations conducted through narrative rather than force. Astrologically, it represents visibility among influential circles, ideological positioning, and the tension between public image and private strategy. The coming month suggests heightened awareness of how actions are perceived within these broader frameworks. This does not necessarily indicate physical presence or participation, but rather an energetic relationship with global conversations, economic narratives, and authority structures. The chart implies that alignment or misalignment with these symbolic spaces affects momentum. As the month progresses, there is a growing emphasis on recalibration. Planetary movements encourage reflection on tone, approach, and long-term goals. This is not a period of surrender, but of refinement. Strength expressed with precision gains more traction than strength expressed through force alone. Toward the final third of the month, emotional equilibrium becomes more attainable. The earlier sense of pressure softens into focus. Decisions made during this time benefit from hindsight gained earlier in the cycle. What initially felt reactive can now be addressed strategically. There is also an undercurrent of legacy awareness. Questions of how actions today shape future narratives become more prominent. Astrology highlights the importance of aligning behavior with the image one wishes to project long-term, not just in the immediate moment. The month concludes with a sense of stabilization. While not all tensions resolve, the internal stance becomes firmer. Confidence shifts from external validation to internal certainty. This is a subtle but significant change. It marks a transition from reacting to circumstances to shaping response. In summary, the next 30 days emphasize visibility, pressure, strategic communication, and long-term positioning. Greenland symbolizes enduring influence and patience. Davos symbolizes narrative power and global perception. Together, they reflect a month where legacy thinking, restraint, and adaptability determine how momentum evolves. This astrological interpretation is offered for insight and reflection only. It does not predict specific events and should be understood as symbolic, not literal. If this astrological reading resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video. Share it with anyone who enjoys astrology and collective insights. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future astrology readings, monthly forecasts, and long-term astrological perspectives. Your support helps this space grow and allows these readings to continue. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, please remember that this astrological exploration is created for entertainment, symbolic reflection, and personal insight only. Astrology does not predict real-world events, outcomes, or decisions. The individuals mentioned are public figures, and this reading does not promote, oppose, or evaluate any political ideology or action. It explores planetary cycles as archetypal patterns of leadership, power, and collective themes. In 2026, the global atmosphere feels shaped less by sudden events and more by long, slow cycles that invite humanity to reflect on how power is expressed, sustained, and transformed. Astrology does not tell us what will happen. Instead, it offers a symbolic language, a way of observing timing, rhythm, and collective moods that appear again and again throughout history. When we look at figures such as Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Emmanuel Macron, astrology does not focus on personalities alone. It views them as representatives of broader archetypes: authority, ambition, control, renewal, tradition, and change. In this sense, they act as mirrors through which larger global themes are expressed. The year 2026 is strongly influenced by slower-moving planets, Pluto, Saturn, and Neptune, which traditionally symbolize deep structural change, long-term responsibility, and collective ideals. These planets do not rush. Their influence unfolds gradually, often beneath the surface, shaping the environment in which leadership operates rather than dictating specific actions. Pluto, associated with transformation and the exposure of hidden structures, continues to emphasize themes of power redistribution and the end of outdated systems. Wherever Pluto is active, astrology speaks of pressure, not as punishment, but as a catalyst. Pressure reveals what is strong enough to evolve and what has reached its limits. On a global level, this often corresponds with conversations about authority, control, and the reshaping of influence. Saturn, the planet of responsibility and boundaries, adds a stabilizing but demanding tone to 2026. Symbolically, Saturn asks leaders and institutions to confront consequences, accountability, and long-term sustainability. This does not imply success or failure. Rather, it reflects a period where patience, structure, and realism become more important than speed or spectacle. Neptune's influence introduces a contrasting layer: ideals, narratives, and collective dreams. Under Neptune, astrology often observes moments when perception matters as much as reality. Stories, symbolism, and emotional resonance carry great weight. This can inspire hope and imagination, but it also encourages discernment, reminding us to stay grounded. Within this broader cosmic landscape, each public figure reflects a different expression of power cycles. Donald Trump, astrologically associated with themes of disruption and strong personal will, symbolically resonates with moments when systems are challenged from within. In astrological language, this represents tension between established structures and individual authority. In 2026, the emphasis is not on sudden breakthroughs, but on how personal influence interacts with long-term collective currents. The symbolism here is about endurance, pressure, and adaptation rather than immediate outcomes. Vladimir Putin, often astrologically linked to themes of control, endurance, and centralized authority, reflects the archetype of long-held power. In symbolic astrology, such figures tend to become focal points during periods when the cost of maintaining control increases. This does not suggest events or decisions, but rather highlights the universal theme of sustainability: how long-standing structures respond to changing conditions. Xi Jinping's astrological symbolism aligns with cycles of order, continuity, and strategic patience. In 2026, planetary patterns emphasize gradual evolution rather than abrupt change. This reflects a broader archetype of leadership, focused on long-term vision, timing, and alignment with historical momentum, astrology frames this not as prediction, but as an energetic rhythm, emphasizing steadiness over reaction. Emmanuel Macron represents a different archetype, one connected to reform, adaptation, and the balance between tradition and innovation. In astrological symbolism, such figures often emerge during transitional periods, acting as bridges between old frameworks and new models. The year 2026 emphasizes recalibration, suggesting themes of reassessment and refinement rather than dramatic shifts. When we step back and view these figures together, astrology tells a larger story, not about individuals, but about the collective phase humanity is moving through. Power cycles are rarely about domination alone. They are about responsibility, legitimacy, and alignment with collective needs. Astrologically, 2026 carries the message that influence is no longer sustained by force or image alone. Symbolic planetary patterns emphasize resilience, adaptability, and coherence between values and actions. This applies universally to institutions, leaders, and individuals alike. It is important to remember that astrology does not replace critical thinking, personal responsibility, or real-world expertise. It does not tell us what to believe or whom to support. Instead, it invites reflection. It asks us to observe patterns, question assumptions, and consider how cycles repeat across time. Global power, through an astrological lens, is not fixed. It moves, reshapes, and responds to collective consciousness. The figures we observe today are part of a much larger story, one that has unfolded across centuries and will continue long after any single cycle completes. As 2026 progresses, astrology symbolically emphasizes the importance of awareness over reaction, of understanding over judgment, of observing the rhythm beneath the noise. Whether you follow astrology closely or simply enjoy it as a symbolic language, this moment invites curiosity. How does power change? How do systems evolve? And how do individuals collectively shape the world they live in? Thank you for spending this time in reflection and exploration. If you found this perspective meaningful or thought-provoking, feel free to like the video, share it with others who enjoy astrological insight, and subscribe to the channel for more symbolic, reflective content. Welcome to this astrological insight, exploring symbolic planetary cycles connected to global leadership themes and the Arctic region over the next 3 months. This presentation offers a general astrological interpretation based on collective planetary movements and symbolic timing cycles. Astrology does not predict specific events, decisions, or outcomes. It reflects themes, pressures, and energetic patterns that may become more visible during a given period. This content is intended for educational and reflective purposes only. The Arctic as a symbolic focus. In astrology, regions associated with extreme environments, such as the Arctic, symbolize endurance, containment, and long-term survival strategies. Astrologically, the Arctic aligns with Saturnian symbolism, boundaries, discipline, patience, and strategic restraint. It also carries Plutonian undertones, connected to deep resources, power beneath the surface, and influence that develops slowly rather than publicly. Over the next 3 months, planetary patterns highlight a renewed symbolic emphasis on territory, energy systems, resilience, and long-term positioning, rather than rapid movement or visible expansion. Leadership energy. In the current cycle, astrological analysis of public figures such as Vladimir Putin does not evaluate intent or forecast actions. Instead, it examines how leadership archetypes interact with collective planetary pressures and public perception. During this 3-month window, the dominant astrological tone suggests containment rather than acceleration. This is a period where influence is maintained through structure, consistency, and endurance, rather than outward displays of force. Saturn's influence remains strong, reinforcing themes of responsibility, consolidation, and consequence. This planet emphasizes stability under pressure and favors calculated responses over impulsive reactions. Over the next 3 months, planetary movements emphasize tension between structure and transformation within collective power systems. This is not an energy of collapse, but of reassessment. Astrologically, Davos aligns with themes of Saturn and Pluto symbolism: authority, responsibility, long-term planning, and the weight of legacy decisions. The planetary climate suggests that discussions, statements, and symbolic gestures associated with global forums may carry more interpretive weight than immediate practical outcomes. In other words, the astrology points toward a period where what is said and how it is framed matters more than what is enacted in the moment. This cycle favors controlled messaging, strategic restraint, and cautious positioning. Attempts to dominate narratives or force consensus may meet subtle resistance. Astrology instead supports diplomacy through tone, timing, and indirect influence rather than direct assertion. There is also a notable emphasis on economic symbolism. The planetary patterns highlight themes of resource preservation, redistribution of influence, and recalibration of long-term priorities. Rather than signaling dramatic shifts, astrology points toward quiet negotiations and delayed consequences, decisions whose full impact may only become visible much later. Within this context, Davos represents a mirror rather than a driver. The astrological energy suggests that the forum reflects broader global currents rather than directing them. Participants may become more aware of limitations, boundaries, and systemic inertia. This awareness can foster realism, but also a sense of constraint. Astrologically, this is a period where credibility and coherence outweigh spectacle. Messaging that appears grounded, consistent, and aligned with long-term structures gains more resonance than emotionally charged or reactionary discourse. When connected with the Arctic and personal natal symbolism discussed earlier, a pattern emerges: endurance over acceleration. Davos, under this planetary climate, is less about breakthroughs and more about holding lines, reassessing leverage, and maintaining stability under pressure. As the 3-month cycle progresses, the astrology suggests a gradual shift from external display toward internal recalibration. Forums like Davos may serve as moments of reflection rather than catalysts for immediate change. This is not stagnation, but strategic pause. From an astrological standpoint, examining a natal chart does not describe actions or intentions, but rather patterns of response, internal structure, and long-term energetic tendencies. In this context, Vladimir Putin's natal symbolism highlights themes of endurance, control, and strategic containment. His chart is strongly marked by fixed and disciplined planetary energies, which astrologically correspond to persistence, emotional restraint, and a preference for long-term positioning over short-term visibility. This type of chart rarely seeks rapid change. Instead, it emphasizes gradual consolidation of power, often through patience and structure rather than overt movement. Over the next 3 months, transiting planetary influences interact with these natal patterns in a way that reinforces containment rather than expansion. Astrology suggests a phase where maintaining stability becomes more important than initiating new directions. External pressure does not necessarily weaken this energy. Instead, it tends to reinforce inward focus and strategic discipline. There is also a strong indication of internal recalibration. Symbolically, this reflects a period where decisions are filtered through experience rather than impulse. The chart emphasizes boundaries, knowing where not to move, where to wait, and where silence itself becomes a form of control. Emotionally, the natal symbolism points to a tendency toward detachment during periods of sustained pressure. Astrology does not interpret this as avoidance, but as a mechanism for maintaining equilibrium. This detachment allows for observation, assessment, and delayed response, which aligns with the broader planetary theme of endurance over reaction. When viewed alongside the Arctic symbolism discussed earlier, this natal pattern becomes even more pronounced. Both the personal chart and the collective astrological climate emphasize cold clarity, patience, and long-term resilience. Progress is not driven by momentum, but by the ability to remain unmoved while circumstances evolve. Astrologically, this 3-month window does not highlight transformation or disruption within the natal framework. Instead, it reinforces existing structures. The chart responds best to pressure when it is allowed time. Any attempt to force acceleration during this period would be astrologically misaligned. Power, energy, and strategic timing. In astrological language, power is not only physical or political. It also refers to timing, momentum, and the ability to withstand external stress without destabilization. The Arctic symbolically represents energy held in reserve. Planetary symbolism over the next 3 months favors protection of resources, measured pacing, and careful assessment of exposure. Mars contributes intensity, but its energy is tempered by Saturn. This suggests effort without haste, action guided by limits, and awareness of long-term implications. Astrology during this period favors discipline over visibility, communication, and global perception. Mercury's influence during this cycle highlights communication as a strategic factor. Statements, silences, and symbolic gestures carry heightened interpretive weight. Astrologically, this is a time where what is not said can be as significant as what is expressed. Careful timing, controlled messaging, and awareness of international perception are emphasized. Neptune adds complexity to global narratives, suggesting that interpretation and projection may blur clarity. Astrology advises discernment, both from leaders and from observers. The Arctic as long-term influence. Symbolically, the Arctic represents environments where preparation and foresight are essential. It reflects power that operates through patience rather than immediacy. Over the next 3 months, planetary symbolism suggests a focus on long-term influence rather than short-term resolution. This is a positioning phase rather than a conclusion. Astrology indicates that influence built quietly during this period may carry weight beyond the immediate cycle. Mid-cycle adjustment. As the 3-month window progresses, planetary movements suggest subtle recalibration. Pressure becomes more structured. What initially feels restrictive may begin to reveal its strategic function. Jupiter's influence later in the cycle introduces opportunity, but only when paired with restraint. Expansion without structure is not favored. Growth aligned with discipline is. This period rewards adaptability without loss of control. As this 3-month cycle draws to a close, the astrological symbolism points toward containment, recalibration, and quiet consolidation rather than resolution or dramatic shifts. This is not a period defined by visible outcomes, but by internal positioning. Planetary patterns emphasize the importance of holding ground, maintaining structure, and allowing pressure to refine strategy rather than fracture it. In astrology, such moments often mark the space between action and consequence, where influence is shaped not by movement but by endurance. The symbolic connection between leadership energy and the Arctic reinforces this theme. The Arctic does not respond to urgency, it rewards preparation, foresight, and respect for limits. Astrologically, this suggests that influence during this cycle is sustained through patience, calculated restraint, and long-term awareness rather than immediacy or reaction. Over the next 3 months, planetary forces encourage a measured approach to power, resources, and global perception. Momentum is preserved not through expansion, but through stability. Progress unfolds beneath the surface, often invisible, until its effects become undeniable. This period highlights the value of strategic silence, disciplined pacing, and adaptability without loss of control. What appears static externally may, in reality, be a phase of structural strengthening. Ultimately, this cycle reflects a broader astrological truth. Enduring influence is rarely loud. It is built through timing, containment, and the ability to remain grounded under sustained pressure. This interpretation is offered for reflection and symbolic insight only.
Astrology does not predict events or outcomes, but provides a framework for understanding collective patterns and energetic shifts as they evolve over time.